Hello everyone, salam and adab. And today's session is on partition's first generation, oral history, Aligarh and Muslim South Asia. And the speaker is Dr. Ambar H. Abbas, who is the Associate Professor of History, Director of Nealis Program in Asian Studies at St. Joseph University, Philadelphia. She'll be formally introduced by Dr. Hafsa Kanjwal, who is the Associate Professor of South Asian History at the Department of History at Lafayette College, Philadelphia, or somewhere near Philadelphia. She was a speaker recently in February on Kashmir. And this concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Gregory Maxwell Bruce, who is an assistant professor of South Asian languages and civilization at University of Chicago. I think he has studied in India also. He's fluent in Hindi, Urdu, and other languages. So welcome you all. And before that, I will just um, make a statement. This is probably on the history of India's partitions and the role of Aligarh or not, how much Aligarh participated into it. But obviously, as an Indian, we try to say things in a different way about partition. Aligarh being a premier institution of that time, it was obvious that there were other forces, counter forces, one believing in one kind of imagination and the other in other kind of imagination. This is not unusual for a large institution. We see it at JNU, we see it here at Berkeley, we see it everywhere. So that's okay. With that, I invite Dr. Hafsa Kanjwal for a formal introduction.
Hello, everyone. It is a great honor for me today to introduce Dr. Amber Abbas. Dr. Abbas is an associate professor of history and the director of the Nealis program in Asian Studies at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. She teaches courses on world history, South Asia, South Asian America, and oral history methodology. One of the incredible aspects of Dr. Abbas's research, teaching, and scholarship is that she traverses across the national boundaries of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, which not a lot of South Asian historians are able to do. She's the author of Partition's First Generation, Space, Place, and Identity in Muslim South Asia, which was published by IB Tauris in 2020. The book brings together oral history narratives of 70 former AMU students. Their stories cross the boundaries of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the book reframes how we understand partition to draw attention to the ways that individuals experienced ongoing changes associated with partitioning throughout the region and not just at the borders. As one of the reviewers of the book wrote, and I quote, "This book then is a welcome attempt to document experiences of spaces where there was an absence of explicit violence or bloodshed, and as Dr. Abbas argues, which therefore do not find a place in official or institutional archives. Where there was violence and disruption, it seemingly merits more attention, and indeed, more accounts do focus on violent displacements associated with partition. Yet it is important to document the lives affected by everyday violence across the hinterlands of partition. The experience of the everyday is important to document and understand because of the changes taking place in contemporary India, where the Muslim question has been revived in a manner reminiscent of the immediate post-partition period and is being reconnected to notions of citizenship vis-a-vis the 2019-2020 CAA-NRC controversy." End quote. I wanted to share that review because I think, or that context of that review, because I think hopefully this will set up the importance and the continuing relevance of Dr. Abbas's scholarship. In addition, Dr. Abbas's work engages with questions of the South Asian diaspora as well. She contributes to and collaborates with the South Asian American Digital Archive by training oral history fellows and has served as president and secretary of its board of directors and co-chair of its inaugural academic council. For those of you who may not be aware, SADA, as it's commonly referred to, is an excellent resource for scholars and students. In my teaching, I often have students engage with its incredible archival collections, which includes a resource called the First Days Project, which is a collection of stories of South Asian immigrants' arrival to the United States. In addition, she serves on the editorial board of the academic journal Critical Pakistan Studies. Dr. Abbas is currently developing an oral history project in Gilgit-Baltistan that seeks to preserve the languages and cultures of Pakistan's indigenous mountain communities. On a personal note, I met Dr. Abbas some years ago at a conference. As a junior scholar, I really appreciated her interest in and support of my work and her intellectual generosity. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to introduce her today, and I know that we will all benefit from this session. So.
Thank you so much, Hafsa. Thank you for agreeing to join us today. We were just here a couple of weeks ago in which I got to play the opposite role, so I really appreciate you coming. And I just want to extend my thanks to everyone in the Indian diaspora Washington, D.C. community and to Razi Saab specifically for seeking me out to give this talk today. I know that it treads some territory that is sensitive in this group, and that many people here are united by an appreciation and love for the Aligarh Muslim University, and I share that with you. So in part of that, I have to acknowledge that I could not have done any of the research that I did without the support of the AMU Old Boys Associations and the women who are also associated with them in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in the United States. I have really myself been the beneficiary of the generosity of the community in so many ways, and hope to make my small contribution to the ways we understand the university and its place in South Asia. And I specifically do sort of refer to South Asia as a whole because Alighs are everywhere there, and of course now worldwide. Thanks also to my friend Max Bruce, who actually came up with the title for the book. You will, in this community, of course, be familiar with David Lelyveld's Aligarh's First Generation, and Professor Lelyveld was a huge influence on me and anyone who has done scholarly work around the university. And so it is as an homage to his work and his title that Max helped me to name the book, with Professor Lelyveld's blessing, Partition's First Generation. And so I want to talk a little bit about the book and sort of the way my title is set up to really talk about oral history and what it is, Aligarh as a place, and then how it fits in Muslim South Asia. And then at the end, I am going to say a few words about Sada. So thank you for bringing that up. I added a couple of slides just so that folks in this group know about it at this time. So in my book, I focus on the Aligarh Muslim University as a unique site of partitioning that really, I think, can change the way we understand the repercussions of partition itself. In AMU, the disruption of partitioning was distinct from the actual experience of border violence that we perhaps know better from studies of partition. But it was really connected to the fear of violence and the disturbance of the sense of belonging that had been cultivated at AMU since its earliest days. And I figured this out by listening to students who had been there, 72 former AMU students that I personally interviewed who narrated the disruptions of partitioning by talking about specific campus spaces that suddenly felt unsafe. So in AMU, I argue that partition disrupted the institutional underpinnings of everyday life and left students disoriented. Dreams in this context were both realized and deferred, as familiar worlds were rendered strange, as new sources of authority replaced the traditional ones, and safe places became threatening. So I do have a little slideshow that I'll put up here. So you don't have to look at me the whole time. Continue to share. Is the PowerPoint working? Yes? Okay, beautiful. So these partition stories are not the stories of violence that scholars like Gyan Pandey have argued was partition. And yet lives were disturbed by the refiguring of states that partitioning caused. So by listening to them, they help us to develop a more complex understanding of the partition experience. In the AMU environment, for instance, narrators almost never speak of trauma, but they do speak of the social dislocation and alienation that is typical of traumatic experience, whether they chose to migrate or not, and even if they experienced no actual violence, partition's disruptions resonate in their narratives. None of the narrators I interviewed cast themselves as partition's victims, even if they gave up land or jobs or connections to historical sites of meaning in order to migrate to Pakistan, even if they recognized that Muslims have faced a more difficult path to success in India, and even if they acknowledged the failures of the state to secure and serve their interests in East Pakistan and later Bangladesh. Instead, they demonstrate the value of Aligarh's consolidation of Muslim identity and the importance that it still has to them in their lives. So, distant from these borders, AMU persists as a key site of partitioning, not because of its location on the map, but because of its meaning as a place. Students carried with them the experiences, the values, and the histories that had defined their lives at AMU, a self-consciously Muslim environment that has been surrounded by a non-Muslim majority throughout its entire history. They experienced the independence and partition of India and Pakistan as a dynamic interaction of local and national priorities, of public and private worlds. My research, undertaken in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, the United States, and the United Kingdom from 2005 to 2010, generated oral histories and oral geographies and created a new archive of lived experience that links contemporary challenges of belonging in South Asia, as Professor Kandwal mentioned, with the disturbance of particular sites of meaning before, during, and after the 1947 partition. And I'm not going to do a chapter rundown or talk about the book as a whole. You can buy it if you'd like to read it. But I am going to talk a little bit about some of the key findings that I thought were especially important in formulating this reconception of partition in different kinds of spaces. But I'm going to start by saying a few things about oral history, because now for me, reflecting on my development as a scholar and the work that I've done, it's been quite some time since I did these interviews. And in that time, the field of partition scholarship has grown very substantially. So when I did, so a couple things about oral history, and then I'll talk about my interview specifically. The production of history in oral histories is a process of engagement with past and present. Aligarh narratives, therefore, reveal the major fault lines of Muslim life in South Asia and the ways that partitioning redefines it. In oral history, the importance of historical facts lies in their meaning to the storyteller. The fact that they believe and remember certain experiences as true is as significant as what really happened, as important as the facts stashed away in archives or recorded in newspapers. Oral history, therefore, opens up the events that make up the conscious past of individuals and communities. Scholars have been collecting oral histories now from partition survivors for over 25 years, probably 35, actually, if I'm being honest. And I've been working with them for almost 2 decades. But the collections that existed when I began my research were overwhelmingly Indian, Punjabi, and Hindu. Many more collections exist now, illuminating Sindh, Bengal, Delhi, and other places, as well as more accurately reflecting India's human diversity. The 1947 Partition Archive, for instance, represents a substantial, although minimally analyzed repository that spans the globe. Still, the oral histories I collected shed new light on our understanding of partition in a few key ways. First, they record Muslim voices, which are discernible only faintly in most partition historiography. And more specifically, most of the people I interviewed are Alighs. They each attended the AMU or its affiliated institutions, including the Women's College, during the 1940s and 50s. Almost all of the narrators shared the experience of residential life in AMU. And this group of individuals emerged then from this tightly regulated social and educational and political environment at a formative time in their own lives and in the histories of their various nations and states. Those who are still with us, and many have since passed, despite their advanced age when I spoke to them, vividly remembered the events of 1947. And for many of them, the moment of decision, the choice whether to pursue their futures in India or Pakistan, marked a critical turning point in their own lives. So of the 72 individuals that I personally interviewed, 32 had chosen Pakistan between 1947 and 65. A couple of them were originally from Lahore, for instance, but the majority had relocated between 47 and 48. A handful migrated later, following family members who urged them to come. And some of the women migrated after they married men who had settled in Pakistan, whose roots also may have been in UP. Another 28 of the people that I interviewed remained in India. Many of those individuals never supported the idea of Pakistan. And for some, family circumstances, such as an attachment to land or community, or a father's attachment to Congress nationalism, or even their own youth, really prevented them from making an independent decision. And finally, there was a small group who settled in East Pakistan. The majority of them were ethnic Bengali or Siletis, and these narrators later supported the Bangladeshi independence. So it's really from that constellation of experiences that my arguments come. Second, these narratives preserve experiences other than violence. In the absence of an event of violence, they would find no place in official or even institutional archives. While most histories of partition focus on its disruptive violence and displacements, these narratives focus on lives affected by the everyday violences and everyday violences of other kinds that rendered familiar places suddenly strange. With that in mind, they highlight places other than borders. They draw attention to places not typically included as sites of partition because they're far from the borders drawn in both 47 and 71. If we center Punjab, as much partition historiography has done, as the dominant site of partition, if we decenter Punjab as the dominant site of partition, as scholars like, say, Joya Chatterjee has done with her work on the Bengal border, other stories of partitioning have the chance to emerge. So here, in my study, instead of a border, the site of partitioning might be a cinema, a railway car, or even a medium-sized university town in the hinterlands. I argue, therefore, that whether a place was disturbed by partition was not only about physical violence, but also about the rearrangement of community patterns and the introduction of new forces and new faces into communities that changed the way in which they operated. AMU was a place that defined and was defined by a group of Muslims whose community was and remains deeply disturbed by the changes partition wrought. So I know that many in this group are intimately familiar with AMU, but I want to provide a little context for how it figures in these oral histories and my own understanding. Because for its students, AMU was well established as a place, a location that was bounded by meaning. The university's physical and emotional boundaries were coterminous with those of home. Sir Syed, of course, was the father of the institution, whose priorities guided students throughout its history. And as a side note, I'll mention that fathers figure in a special way in the history of Aligarh, and I talk about it a little bit more in the book, but also that part of the way I come to this work is through my own family experience. My father was born in Aligarh, and so that is how I sort of became connected to it. So Sir Syed's idea for the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, founded in 1875, that became the AMU in 1920, was to groom a generation of Muslims who would be in a position to do good to their country through attention to the knowledge, skills, and values necessary to qualify them for public leadership. Faculty inherited his mantle and maintained a parental authority, and as is true of all parental authority, it was often challenged. As you know, there was plenty of mischief in AMU. But the faculty sought not just to educate, but to protect and guide, to create an extension of home on the campus. The MAO College and later AMU relied on strictures of hierarchy and discipline within circles of safety that emanated from Aligarh to develop the Aligarh man. It was strict adherence to the norms of the outside world that prepared strict adherence to the norms of the inside world that prepared boys for the world outside. Zakir Ali Khan, for instance, emphasized this point that inner discipline built the resilience and self-assurance that students would need outside. Though he told me, we are proud of it. It brought a lot of self-confidence in us. We will undertake, or we can go anywhere, you give us any problem, we will try to solve the problem. We will undertake the responsibility and we will try to resolve this according to the best of our ability. And that is the lesson of Aligarh. So in the 1940s, the boundary walls set the institution apart from the distinctly different world outside. They kept its wards in and the rest of the world out. Students were permitted to go into the city, but they had to return to their hostels by 9:30 p.m. Restrictive though this system may seem, Zakir Ali Khan and others remembered with pride that the whole system was organized by students and staff only. No police were involved. They were so competent that no quarreling was going on. The proctors, they were all students. So when students left the campus, they were identifiable, of course, by their dress, black sherwani and white trousers. Thus attired, they remained both committed and subject to the university's norms. Senior students were selected to become proctorial monitors, responsible for maintaining student discipline on the university grounds and off. An excerpt from the Aligarh magazine in 1934 links disciplinary norms with the cultivation of the brotherhood at AMU. Quote, it is under the proctorial monitor's guidance that the city, railway station, cinemas in the town, and other places outside the university area are patrolled by these representatives of our law and order, who can haul up any student who misbehaves himself or is guilty of any breach of university discipline or commits an act which is likely to lower the prestige of his fellow students. The statement defines a circle of protection within the purview of the university's disciplinary regime that includes several sites in Aligarh city where the university's disciplinary power would be made visible through the presence of proctorial monitors. In those places, each boy's behavior would reflect on the reputation of his brothers, and he was wise to keep this in mind. The intimacy between discipline and brotherhood rested at the heart of the meaning of an AMU education. So for narrators, the disciplinary regime was a trigger for memories of life before and after partition. And it bred a powerful sense of collective identity that marked their belonging to the institution. It became clear through the oral histories that I collected that AMU was a conceptually and physically bounded environment in which students shared experiences, became a brotherhood, a biradari that bound them to one another and to place. The collective identity formed at AMU was deeply influenced by conceptions and use of space. This applied even in the spatially separate but equally enclosed women's college, dominated by the Abdullah Hall. Yasmin Saikia has noted that the experience of being with others enables those within the space to negotiate a mutual relationship. This friendship, cultivated in place, created a lasting sense of responsibility to those with whom one shares the space, and deep connections to place. The importance of AMU for its students was that it constituted an organized world of meaning that layered their understandings of home and family with their own aspirations for the future. And within this bounded environment, they could develop their ideals. And despite the repeated protestations of the university's administration, could even develop and sustain political opinions and activities with growing confidence throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. For me, that's really important because I read the Pakistan demand as part of a continuum of political action at AMU that began much, much earlier, in which the central thread was the priority of Muslim uplift that emerges clearly as a separate objective from that of independent statehood. The concern of student activists, particularly those at AMU, was for the community, for its integrity, its safety, and its advancement. Those values sustained Sir Sayyid's objectives, but they were not idyllic or selfless. Aligarh boys fully expected that they would be the leaders of that Muslim moral community for which they had worked. Their own welfare, therefore, was tied to the community's fortunes. In my reading, the thread that runs through all three major political moments at Aligarh prior to 1947 is that of solidarity. Muslims at Aligarh came together to support one another for the advancement of the community as a whole, and the persistence of dissenting voices within the Aligarh fold, as Razi Saab drew attention to at the beginning, is a feature, not a bug, that has survived all the political upheavals through the though the institution's well-wishers do like to convey an image of unity. Rather, I think it's the constant pursuit of an ethos of unity that has driven all significant political mobilizations on the campus. In other words, the efforts to consolidate betray the presence of a host of political positions, opinions, and perspectives within it. Nonetheless, this continuity is important because it created a shared field of reference for all of Aligarh's major political moments. And this solidarity creates the context in which we can understand them together rather than as isolated, unique, or distinct. When we compartmentalize these moments, we render Aligarh's politics vulnerable to claims of exceptionalism. It becomes easier then to push certain periods aside as anomalous. But isolating any of these episodes provides fodder for state-centered narratives. But when they are read together, historically, the real meaning and intention of the students' enthusiasm to build and sustain Muslim solidarity emerges. Okay. In the 1920s, MAO college students were at the vanguard of non-cooperation. But the administration, of course, retained British loyalties. Students refused to remain apart from the political agitation. They stood poised to direct the collective strength of the Aligarh Brotherhood toward the larger world of anti-colonial politics. The defining moment of the nationalist period at the university, of course, is the founding of the Jamia Millia Islamia. But the initial revolt did not have enough momentum to keep the institution alive. And it wasn't long before many students returned to a transformed Aligarh Muslim University in the interest of completing their education, and many of them retained their nationalist sympathies. But by the late 1930s, Muslims perceived their status to be compromised. The Indian National Congress by then held several provincial ministries, including in the United Provinces, and Muslims feared being disenfranchised as a minority. By the 1940s, the All India Muslim League, intent to rejuvenate support for Muslim nationalism after the return of Muhammad Ali Jinnah to Indian politics, exploited the tension between Hindus and Muslims and specifically recruited Muslim students. The League leaders, for their part, especially Jinnah and his right-hand man, the Alig Liaquat Ali Khan, repeatedly reminded AMU boys of their centrality to the League's strength and Muslim life in general. Jinnah taught them that they represented India's Muslims, and hence that India's Muslims were like them, regardless of their regional or linguistic origin. Major General Ghulam Omar remembered meeting Jinnah in March 1940 when he spoke before the Muslim University. And these were his words. He repeated these to me from memory, almost verbatim. The thing I want to note is he's off on the date. Jinnah was actually in Aligarh on the 6th of March, but the fact that he carried the specificity of this throughout his entire life really stood out to me. When Jinnah visited Aligarh, he says, I was a student there, and he addressed the students, and he used the word Muslim India. One of the students got up and asked him, where is Muslim India? There are some provinces where Muslims are in the majority, 4 or 5 provinces, but otherwise Muslims are in Bengal and Madras, everywhere. What is this Muslim India? And Jinnah said, there is not a corner of India from which a Muslim student is not present here. This is Muslim India. In other words, Omar emphasized, that was his concept of Muslim community. So the Urdu-speaking elites subscribed wholeheartedly to the idea that Jinnah inherited from Sir Sayyid, that the Muslims were a united moral community, which he now labeled a nation, because when they looked at its values, they saw themselves reflected. Muhammad Ali Jinnah further empowered the students with the words, "What Aligarh thinks today, Muslim India will think tomorrow." This Muslim nation and its claims, heralded at AMU just prior to the passing of the Lahore Resolution on March 23rd, 1940, articulated a claim for statehood, became the object and the goal of the Muslim League demand for Pakistan. That's the object and the goal of the League demand for Pakistan. Whether it's the same as what the students were after, I'm not so sure. Jinnah missed no opportunity to try to convince the youth of this and to impress upon them the need to be self-reliant. It was no use, he said, depending on anybody. We must depend on ourselves. I am willing to be friendly with all, but I depend on my own inherent strength. Jinnah understood his audience. His declarations affirmed AMU students' own beliefs. So many of the AMU students who fought in the elections in 1945 and 46 on behalf of the League hailed from minority provinces, and it was never obvious that they would be required to shift to Pakistan to enjoy the benefits of Pakistan's autonomy, and many of them, of course, did not. Only by separating the outcome of the Pakistan demand from the political mobilization that made it possible does it become clear why the League's rhetoric was so appealing to AMU students. There was no suggestion that the students would be required to migrate to enjoy Pakistan's fruits. The Pakistan movement, driven by students bound together by common interest, would give expression to the hidden feelings of the Muslim nation. As election workers, the students enjoyed this excitement already. Electioneering extended the privileges of an Aligarh identity across the landscape as they fanned out across the country, working for the Muslim League. The involvement of Aligarh students in electioneering on behalf of the League has persisted as the most resilient image of Muslim student activism for Pakistan, but it was not the only student activism in favor of Pakistan. University students across the country were engaged, and it is sort of the high point of their association with League politics, which also means that there were some low points later. Their enthusiasm, seen from the Pakistani side of the border, establishes their credentials as transparently nationalistic. This is an easy story to tell. From that angle, it appears that AMU students as a whole shared enthusiasm for Pakistan and the League's goals. And indeed, Bangladeshi jute expert Salahuddin Chaudhry told me that the idea of Pakistan was more or less not controversial when he was a student at AMU. For many of these young men, the emergence of the League fulfilled a hitherto nascent desire for action. It was an exciting and inspiring time to be a student at AMU. Indian narrators spin the same events in the opposite direction and even decried their own involvement in the Indian election. Masood al-Hassan was one of the very few Indian narrators willing to speak in some detail about his experiences in League electioneering, and he represented League activity as an occasion for self-manifestation. In retrospect, though, he dismissed student electioneering and their activities as inconsequential, overblown in students' memories. Delhi University professor of history, Muhammad Amin, resisted the suggestion that there was any coercion on the part of League sympathizers to draw in others. Rather, he told me, if a student didn't want to go electioneering for personal reasons, there was no pressure to do otherwise. If one is thinking 15 or 20 days, that would be a loss, then one might decide not to go. Amin pointed to the debate on the fundamental conflict between education and politics in Aligarh. Electioneering interfered with the academic agenda of the university. If students went away they might not be able to keep up with the content or meet the requisite attendance minimums to be allowed to sit for their exams. At first, League leaders towed the university's line. They encouraged students to spread the League's message only during their vacations. But later, Liaquat Ali Khan urged them to give up even a whole academic year if necessary to fight for Pakistan. Iqbal Shafi, who I'm sorry I didn't include his photo, then only a student of the intermediate, was unfazed by the potential effect on his academics whereas Amin worried about meeting attendance requirements. When Shafi realized that the attendance would be insufficient for his year to count, he began to look forward to further adventures that he might have instead of attending classes. Imagine his disappointment when the Vice Chancellor, Ziauddin Ahmed, remembered always as an advocate for students, allowed the students to sit for their annual exams, despite the ostensibly disqualifying poor attendance. So when former students described their lives in AMU before 47, they drew attention to it as a place defined by behavioral expectations, predictable social relations. And they spoke of three really key sites of meaning: Aligarh's picture halls, the railway platforms and trains, and the city of Delhi, that defined what I call circles of safety that surround the institution. And they spoke of the space beyond, an outer circle of protection that connected them to sites of importance in the broader region of the United Provinces, now, of course, Uttar Pradesh, during the 1940s, a time of intense political activity in Aligarh. Students were lured by the broader world of politics beyond the university's boundaries. And the political ferment of the 1940s, and there were, as I mentioned, a variety of political perspectives represented on the campus, from the Muslim League to Congress to the Marxists. This political ferment challenged the sources of university authority that Zakir Ali Khan had referred to earlier, as students started to seek a place in a world where they would no longer be British subjects, but fully independent citizens. Up till now, the boundary around Aligarh had held protective power. The institution's reputation spread beyond the campus and the town. But by the middle of 1946, as AMU's identity was increasingly politicized, the power of access that unique AMU identity had given began to diminish. The political activism of the 1940s had caused a kind of recentering of AMU as a hub of Muslim nationalism. And in the context of the anti-colonial movement, this parochial identity increasingly came into conflict with the Congress's aspirations for a united India. Mohiuddin Khan, now settled in Bangladesh, told me that in 1946, the atmosphere was also tense. Sometimes we used to feel that we may be attacked by the Hindu majority people all around, and at night we used to remain very careful. Students patrolled the campus boundaries and kept watch from the rooftops. They rallied to defend the campus against potential attackers, as Masood al-Hassan has written, wielding, many of them even trembling with fear, wielding the sticks of the mosquito nets. Since AMU's earliest days, and in the memory of many of these narrators, the university's independence from the civil authorities was a source of pride. You'll remember Zakir Ali Khan telling me about that earlier. Nonetheless, the fear and anxiety that former students reported in 46 and 47 was real, systemic, pervasive, and inevitable. Their concern was that the boundary walls of the institution might be breached, that non-Muslims would cross the Katpala, enter the university, and attack the students. One narrator, for instance, who had been in AMU since 1945, revealed how his father's refusal to extract him from AMU during this period served to reinforce for him the value of solidarity cultivated on campus. Though at first terrified, he ultimately found solace and strength with the other boys. I wrote to my father, "Please call me back. I am being frightened over here." My father said, "Why? Are you a coward, boy? No, you stay there in the hostel. What happens to the other students will happen to you also, and I think nothing will happen." So I asked, "Well, was your father right?" The narrator replied, "He refused to take me back home. I mean, he was at Kanpur, so Aligarh is not so far from Kanpur. He could have come any time. But no, nothing has happened. It was correct. But I was a lad and much frightened with my other students. They were from a far distance, so they could not easily go home, but I can go to Kanpur very easily. But he refused me. And I still remember that thing, that it gave me some encouragement. He said, what happens to others, it will happen to you also." The railway station was another site under the disciplinary purview of the proctorial monitor and functioned as an extension of the campus. AMU boys were highly visible there. The railway station was the gateway to Aligarh, a site through, as you well know, almost all students had to pass as they moved between university and sometimes distant homes. One narrator recalled, "The senior proctorial monitor was a big guy. And he would flaunt about it. They would display badges, and they were especially prominent at the railway station, where every arriving and departing train was attended upon by them. The visibility of the monitor in the railway station sent a message to both students and the surrounding community that that space was within AMU's bounds. The station, as a fixed space, was within university surveillance, but the students imagined their privilege extending into the trains themselves. Prior to 1947, AMU students frequently traveled by train without actually purchasing tickets. Many narrators referred to this Aligarh tradition and argued that between Aligarh and Delhi, a distance of fewer than 100 miles, AMU students were not expected to purchase a ticket. As Pakistani Captain Wazir Khan put it, the Sherwani was like the license to travel, even without a ticket. The trains and the railway lines marked out the boundaries of territory that they considered our own. By imagining a network of cities, an extended circle of safety, connected by railways through which they could freely move. And as they traveled along those railway lines, they inscribed a network of meaning upon the landscape. During the 45-46 elections, AMU students depended upon the privilege of free rail travel. Students traveled to Delhi, a journey of only a couple of hours, to All India Muslim League meetings and to meet, or more often to try to meet, with Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Whereas many students may not have been able to afford a ticket, the system made it possible for them to leave Aligarh in the afternoon for a meeting after the evening prayers and to return the following day for free. Bangladeshi Habibur Rahman explained that as part of their support for the League agenda, we had to go. Regularly, we had to go. I see that there's a question. Can I take it at the end? In 47, however, trains became sites of catastrophic violence on the border, and the specter hung over AMU students. The meaning of trains changed during 1947, Vizier Khan told me, because thousands and thousands were killed. Those who could travel by train, all the trains were attacked and the people were butchered. They will not spare anybody. And here the university's influence exerted no protective power. AMU students' fear of attack now extended to the railway cars, previously sites of entitlement, where the visibility of the uniform would mark them as other, rendering their position even more precarious. The same fear of mobs breaching the boundaries of the campus space by crossing the Katpula is mirrored in stories about trains and railway lines. So the disruptions of 46 and 47 altered AMU's place in the world, both spatially and affectively, and students' freedom within those outer circles of safety declined. Like many stories told by former AMU students about the period immediately after the 47 partition and independence of India, none of these young men became the victim of anti-Muslim violence. Still, the narrators repeatedly described a traumatic sense of being out of place as a result of losing access to sites associated with their history of belonging. One effect of the sense of isolation of AMU from the rest of India prior to 47 was that it had created this sphere of influence that they carried with them when they moved. 1947 recentered AMU as its students were held in part responsible for the division of India. The disruption of that intimate boundary, and not the national ones, is what left students feeling exposed to danger. Ironically, those who never left home felt less safe than those who navigated the uncertain national borders that were actual sites of violence. The destabilization of notions of safety and danger reveals the disruption of meaning in AMU as a place in a larger network of meaning marked by the university, its extended disciplinary regime, and its links to other sites of meaning in India. So for AMU boys, throughout partitioning, fear and anxiety arose from a serious disruption of the sources of authority that had previously served to protect them. Those places in which they had learned to feel safe, to build solidarity, from the local cafes and cinemas of AMU, the Strachey Hall figures prominently in many of these narratives. The railway station that linked home and university, and the very geography of their institution in India now changed irrevocably. By 1946, Aligarh's political and educational environment was tumultuous. University leaders began to leverage the students, the foot soldiers of the League's electioneering teams, to acquire their own political power as Pakistan became a reality. And it was here that the League edifice at AMU began to crumble. AMU's disciplinary regime was undone by the empowerment of the students as political agents, crossing and recrossing its boundaries. And as the vice chancellor's anxiety about this grew, he repeatedly attempted, though mostly ineffectually, to reel the students back in. When Ziauddin realized that Pakistan would be finally created, he called a closed-door staff meeting and, quote, said that it was time, that there was a shift in Aligarh's political role. Aligarh would remain in India and had to adjust and adapt itself to the situation. Political realism demanded that Aligarh withdraw itself from the political forefront. Electioneering had taken students out beyond the farthest circle of safety, but fear drew them back in. And while they feared attack, no one actually crossed the boundary into the university. And whether they defended it with trembling hands or with shows of strength, the university offered protection in the midst of traumatic disruption all around. The boundaries that surrounded AMU were always dynamic. They defined both inside and outside, keeping students in and others out. They were physical and conceptual, defining the campus and the aspirations of Muslim unity embodied by its values. In the 1940s, as students engaged actively with the politics of the world beyond the campus boundaries and experienced the spaciousness it offered, that was both thrilling and terrifying, they redefined the meaning of the place to which they returned. But the erosion of the boundaries created insecurity in the university, fear, as AMU became more exposed in a highly sensitive political environment. Ultimately, the boundary that was drawn between India and Pakistan came to mark a new spatial framework that redefined the place of Muslims both inside and outside the university. It now put a boundary not only between Muslim and non-Muslim South Asians, but between Muslims and even between Alighs. That many AMU students crossed that new boundary into Pakistan in a final act of transgression permanently altered the university itself. Pakistan had been very real for the students, but never was there a real possibility that AMU would be part of it. The challenge of independence was how to forge an identity for the institution that both honored the dream of Muslim solidarity, so firmly rooted in its historical legacy, and to chart a path for a sustainable future. So I just have one last sort of closing thought here, and that is that the first issue of the Aligarh magazine in 1948 opened with a photo of Mohandas K. Gandhi in his funeral shroud. It's not this actual photo. I went to look for the photo I took of the photo, but I couldn't find it this morning, so I used one from the archives. The still face of India's fallen leader appearing there marked a shift in the composition of the editorial board of the Aligarh magazine, and more importantly, the university's outlook. It was a sign that the events of 1947 and 48 had transformed AMU's Mahol. A panegyric essay entitled In Memoriam served as a memorial to the life of Mahatma Gandhi and as a call to AMU students to, quote, pledge ourselves anew to uphold steadfastly by exercising a strenuous moral discipline and working incessantly for a just social and economic order, the ideals of universal human brotherhood and peace, for which he lived so single-mindedly and laid down his life so heroically. Whereas Gandhi had been inducted as the first life member of the University Union in 1920, throughout the 1940s, the Aligarh magazine and the Aligarh University Gazette had treated Gandhi as the representative of a Hindu parochial movement that threatened Muslims. His appearance in the magazine as a national hero and a friend of Muslims signaled a nationalist turn, an effort to harmonize AMU's values with those of the secular Indian state. The call to students to rededicate themselves to moral discipline resonated with the values of AMU's residential system, such that the ideals of Gandhi's Hind Swaraj mixed with the ideals of Sir Syed in service of social and economic justice. The remembrance enjoined students to embrace the universal brotherhood that connected them to Indians beyond the university's boundary walls. The political activity surrounding the Pakistan demand had eroded AMU's vaunted isolation, but the boundary walls had assumed prime importance for ensuring the students' physical safety. In the first issue after independence, the Aligarh magazine suggested that the boundaries between AMU and the rest of India should effectively dissolve. The most important brotherhood was that of Indians, within which Alighs certainly have a place. And that's the conclusion of my remarks about oral history, Aligarh, and India. But I did also, as I mentioned earlier, want to briefly put in a plug for SADA, the South Asian American Digital Archive, an organization that I've been involved with for a long time, that since I'm speaking to a diasporic community, I think is especially important to mention the work that we're doing at SADA to document and preserve the stories of communities like yours by gathering resources, oral histories, stories. Professor Kanjwal mentioned the First Days Project, which is one that people can contribute to freely and independently. We also just are trying to draw attention to the impact, the contributions of the 5.5 million South Asians in the United States. We've published a book that is sort of targeted at younger readers, at middle and high school readers, to introduce them to some of the stories of our communities here in the United States and the impact that South Asian Americans have had here. So we are, of course, a nonprofit organization and funded primarily by individual donations in this time when so much funding from the federal government side is being cut for museums, archives, and libraries. It's especially important that we reach out to our community and engage you as a part of this community-based archives, which is here designed to both represent you and to preserve and share your stories. So I'll leave it there, except to leave you the last little thing, which is that the first oral history in the SADA archive was one that I conducted with my father. He's here sitting on the running board of the train leaving Aligarh in 1947. And so again, as I had mentioned, that's what drew me to this work. But thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a history, really. So let's hear Dr. Bruce for the concluding remarks, and then we will have some question and answer session. Yes, sir. Yeah?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. So first of all, thank you, Professor Abbas, for a beautiful, informative, granular presentation. I'm reminded of just how important this project is, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today, although I'm also, if I'm being honest, a little bit nervous and humbled because, of course, this is a project that speaks for itself and certainly requires no summary remarks from me. This is something that is of such profoundly transformative importance. And I thought what I would do today, as I was thinking this week about what I might say, is respond to aspects of this project that speak to aspects of my own interest in the history of Aligarh and share those reflections with you by way of appreciation and with the group. And I've made some notes here. I don't have something to read out in its entirety, but just some rough sketched notes. And so I hope that's all right with everyone. As I was rereading Partition's First Generation and listening to the talk today, I was reminded that the history of Muslim education and of Muslim educational institutions particularly in English language scholarship, remains largely defined by the history of the founders of those institutions and by the early history of those institutions in the 19th century. And I appreciated both today and in rereading the book how important it is to for all of us who continue to work, myself included, on that early history of an institution like Aligarh, to keep in mind the legacies and longer historical trajectories of these institutions through partition and into the present. In your introduction, you have this beautiful way of speaking to this in very few words when you talk about your subjects drawing Sir Syed, that is, drawing the memory of Sir Syed into the present. And I was struck by that phrase as I was reading again, because I was thinking about how this book not only models a method for thinking about the longer legacies of Aligarh and of Muslim educational and of educational institutions in general, but helps me as someone who is working on the 19th century keep in mind the dynamics of continuity, of change, and the kind of broader stakes of what it means to continue to work on the 19th century when we now have so much history that stretches well into the 20th and 21st. And so I wanted to thank you for this amazing work. The second aspect that really struck me again as I was reading the book, and really struck me quite profoundly as I was listening to your talk today, is the imperative behind work like this. You've talked about collecting oral histories of partition, of this kind of late colonial era moment of politics, the experience of education, of youth, of political organization, of social organization. And I was reminded this morning, thinking back and doing a little bit of math, that this is a moment and a history that is on the verge of passing out of living memory. And the importance of these stories and the importance of gathering them across a range of geographies and experiences and institutions really struck me this morning as I was listening. And so I wanted again to thank you for reminding us of just how important it is to know something about the lived experience of these institutions. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight and express appreciation for has to do with a category that you bring up at the very end of the book, and which came up at moments in your talk today, which is that of belonging and the imperatives around telling the story of institutional histories with an awareness of the social and ethical stakes of what those institutions represent, not only as sites of ideology or education, but as spaces in which belonging is internally created. Yeah. As you mentioned, David Lelyvel shows with the first generation, and you show again in very different ways with the generation around partition at Aligarh, but also thinking, as you hinted at the very end, about what an institution's role is in belonging and Muslim belonging in particular after partition, in shaping conceptions of belonging, something that has been so wonderfully dealt with by you here and also by scholars who are thinking about this concept these days and producing some really interesting work in dialogue with it. And so those are the three things that I wanted to thank you for, and to note again just the importance of thinking about educational institutions not merely as sites of the ideological expressions of the visions of their founders, right? But as sites that are mediated by the histories of those who attend them and study there and find community in them. That organizing principle for scholarship of belonging And finally, that realization of just how important it is to collect these histories and to study them for our time. And so with that, I will conclude with thanks to you and for the very kind invitation to allow me to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you all three. And before we go to question and answer session, just an announcement for the coming Saturday talk. Professor Ajit Mohanty, quite a established scholar, linguist. He's going to talk on living with languages, multilingualism as a resource. He is a ex-professor of JNU and director of many other institutions. And he will be introduced by Professor Padmini Barua from Guwahati University, and the concluding remarks by Professor Girdhar Rao from Azim Premji University, Bangalore, India. And so we now entering into question and answer session. Our usual moderator for the session is Dr. Rafat Hussain, who is currently visiting India. So one of the hosts, either I or Faisal, can take some questions. Let me try. So I can see Dr. Imtiaz Saab's hand raised. Others, Ayaz Ahmad. So let's start with Imtiaz Saab. Imtiaz Saab, be brief, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Abbas, for your very informative presentation. As an old-time Aligarhian, 1949 to 1958, I was very impressed to see the historic pictures you included in your presentation. My question is that universities are supposed to encourage and inculcate critical thinking, rational thinking. Did Aligarh fail in that respect in 1930s and 40s? Or the emotional appeal of the piper such that no rational thinking was possible?
That's a wonderful question. I think it's simply no. If the I think a big part of what I talk about in the book is actually the tension between what the university was sort of trying to do, what Sir Sayed's vision. I mean, Sir Sayed really envisioned there being a separation from education and politics. But I think that the student body just persistently was drawn into action, drawn to opportunities for action. And that's partly what I'm saying when I'm talking about the continuity between the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, is not that the Muslim League activism in the 40s was somehow anomalous or different, but actually it fits into a pattern of engagement that students kept seeking the opportunity to be connected to the world outside, even though the university provided them this kind of safe space inside. So no, I don't think that it failed in inculcating critical thinking. Rather, I think what students were doing was using those skills by pushing the boundaries of expectation. This is something that university students do. This is not unique to Aligarh in a sense, right? The university provides a protected training ground in which students are testing their skills. I think Masood al-Hassan, describes this the most articulately, where he says, like, we were looking for something. There was a lot going on outside, and we were trying to figure out which of these political movements we wanted to be involved in. And I heard that from more than one of the people that I interviewed. So I think actually that engagement by students represents the experiments in critical thinking that they were doing. And the fact that not all of them, that there wasn't unity of political opinion on the campus, I think is really important. Many of the students chose to be engaged with nationalist politics. they don't get as much attention, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there. There were, of course, the Marxist circles under Professor Habib, who were engaging students both in the late 1940s and then particularly during your era in the early 1950s. So I guess in general hesitant to assign a definition of they failed or they succeeded. I just think that there was a lot going on, and I think that there should be a lot going on university campuses.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Well, the next question comes from Ayaz Ahmed. Ayaz Ahmed Saab.
Yeah. Thank you for such an interesting history of AMU. I, as a former member of AMU court, as well as a lawyer and student of philosophy, would like to have this framing question around this study. You have interviewed old boys of AMU, of AMU's first generation after partition. One framing issue around Aligarh Muslim University and the Muslim League politics has always been there through Momin Conference and now the Pasmanda question. Papia Ghosh has in the past, as a historian, has documented it, narrated it brilliantly. Another nugget that I want to bring before I conclude the question is that by 2022, the data of AMU is that 90% of the Muslims which are present in AMU, 90% of them happen to be Ashraf, the upper caste Muslims, and the Pasmanda Ajla Farzal are absent. And the earliest, if we go back to the data at the earliest founding movement of AMU College, then also we find that it was like 100%. At that time, it was 100%, and now we are at 90%. So to narrate the story of Aligarh Muslim University as a Muslim institution versus as an Ashraf institution, and then the failure of Ashraf to come to terms with democracy, whether it was on the question of partition or whether the challenges that we are facing now in terms of Hindutva onslaught, this failure to frame the question and problem as a failure of Ashraf to come to terms with democracy, how is it reflected in the interviews, especially that you have conducted, and is it reflected at all, or the problem is much deeper than it is being brought out by the Pasmanda movement now?
Well, that's a great question. I teach a lot about this in my current work in the university. I will say that one of the things that has become clearer and clearer to me, as someone who trained as a historian of South Asia, for a long time, from the mid-1990s until now, is that I had to very carefully inspect my education for its casteist assumptions. And I think that that's true of all South Asian life. I think, when you're speaking and thinking about, so I think more than anything, I don't have an answer to your question, but it's pushing me to think, which I really appreciate. So one thing to keep in mind is that I was doing these interviews in between 2005 and 2010 in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. The circumstances under which I was asking these questions and engaging with people were different than they are now, but maybe sort of at the beginning of a trajectory. And at that time, tensions between India and Pakistan were quite delicate, particularly in 2009 when I was living in Aligarh. And so when we think about democracy, that question lands very differently in Pakistan, a place that has had obviously a wretched experience with democracy, than it does in India or in Bangladesh. I think you make a really important point, which is about the sort of internal hierarchies that exist within Muslim life throughout the subcontinent and that cannot be pulled apart or disconnected from any of these other stories. I was listening, re-listening to Professor Laurence Gautier's talk before this group last year, and David Lelyveld's response, in which he made the, which he said, well, when I was in Aligarh in the 60s, there was lots of, social diversity. There were people, not everybody there was wealthy or landed. He said, of course, like those groups existed. But I think your point about the overrepresentation of the Ashraf is very well taken, and I talk about that more in the book, perhaps than I did today, in terms of social status and what it means, that the people that I interviewed do come from those Ashraf classes, largely because they were overrepresented in the university during the period that I was researching, and therefore that the story I'm telling is unusual in the kind of work that oral history might excavate. Oral history as a tool has often been used to draw out the voices of people who are underrepresented. And I argue that Muslims as a whole are underrepresented within the story of partition. And I think your point is very well taken, that within Muslim life in South Asia, caste oppressed groups are especially underrepresented. And the last thing I would say about that is that among the work that we do at SADA is trying to especially draw attention to those margins within South Asian American life, if not as much South Asian life.
All right. So before I invite Dr. Iltifat Hassan, I'll just read somebody who just left, an Ashraf, who remained at Aligarh. He's from Lucknow. His comment is, populism and emotional appeals have a profound effect on students. Aligarh was no different. So that is the comment that he certainly is trying to be in defense of Aligarh. So, Dr. Iltifat Hassan.
Thank you, Razibhai. And thank you again for all the presenters for great presentation. They were very good. I have maybe two questions. One is that people that you are interviewing, you're talking to, it's been a long time since partition happened.
Mm-hmm.
Was partition a good thing for the Indian Muslims or bad thing? I would love to hear their stories, their perspective on this, because they have lived through this. Formation of Pakistan was a great emotional thing. So everybody was involved. But I remember my father-in-law, who passed away a few years ago. He was a student in the late 40s in Aligarh. And he said, I participated in the movement now I feel it was not a good idea. So I would love to hear what the people who are still alive, who are still around, and not many are, unfortunately, what is their perspective on this? That was it a good thing or was it a bad thing for Indian Muslims overall? Thank you.
Sure. You may be disappointed by this answer, but it depends on who you ask. And that's especially related to the presence of the international borders. So one of the most sort of heartbreaking moments was when in my research was when Habibur Rahman, who was Bangladeshi, said to me, what soured our relations? What soured the relations between the states? It was the bloodshed. It was the bloodshed. Had we been able to get through this transition without the violence, could South Asia have been an entirely different place? And I think that one of the things that that I realized in this research is the ways in which the creation of Pakistan, as I said at the end, has placed borders between South Asian Muslims and between alighs. You can meet in Dubai other alighs. You can meet in Washington, D.C., other alighs. And there, maybe it doesn't matter whether you are, you have an Indian passport, a Pakistani passport, a U.S. passport, whatever. But you can't meet in Aligarh. And that, to me, is a profound, it's just a profoundly sad outcome for a movement and an institution that did so much to build up a sense of connection, and I think to the point Max was making earlier, a sense of belonging, that sense of belonging to place that cannot be recovered. One of the comments here today was talking about people longing to go home, and the preface to my book is the story of my going to Aligarh, my homecoming to a place I had never been, but that no one else in my family is able to return. My grandmother and my father were born in the same house, and I'm the only one who's been able to go there. And I had a wonderful experience going back and visiting, and had some laddus. But whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it did harm to South Asian Muslim, the notion of South Asian Muslim solidarity that I think was the very ethos on which the Pakistan demand was built and which was so important in Aligarh. Many people that I interviewed on all sides of the border had disappointments to share. As I said in the beginning, whether they left everything and migrated to Pakistan with the expectation of fulfilling this democratic, maybe not democratic, but fulfilling this dream of the Muslim homeland, or whether they remained in India and have now come under the pall of the threat of right-wing Hindu fascism, or whether they went to Bangladesh and were betrayed by the West Pakistani government. So there are plenty of disappointments, and yet none of the people I interviewed cast themselves as victims. Nobody tells their story that way. And I think that's profoundly important. It came up also in Professor Gauthier's talk I was listening to, as I said this morning, this notion of the transformation in the ethos from being a minority requiring safeguards to being a consolidated identity with its own strength. That to me is the real transition that happens in the 1940s, and that I think is part of an ongoing kind of wave of action in which marginalization of Muslims in South Asia creates a sense of like there's harm there. But then because there are these ideas of collective belonging, people respond together in meaningful ways. No, none of these problems have yet been solved permanently. Pakistan didn't solve them. Didn't solve them for Pakistani Muslims. It didn't solve them for Indian Muslims. Certainly didn't solve them for Bangladeshis. So I think thinking about continuity rather than rupture, for me, has been helpful.
Again, with the same notion, somebody before you, Ayaz Ahmed, has mentioned that consolidation of the things that all Muslims formed a nation that evaporated very fast. Now it became what Maulana Azad said, within 25 years you will become a Punjabi or a Sindhi or a Bengali. You have a Bangladesh, and the minorities, Mahajirs, who primarily were responsible for creating Pakistan, are reduced within Hyderabad to Sakkar area. It becomes a contesting ground even for them. Let me bring Dr. Fazal Saab, who just mentioned something, but I want him to say. Fazal Bhai, where are you?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah, please.
Salam to everyone.
Very senior than me.
First, thanks for giving a very excellent talk in some details. And as you know, being Aligarhian, it's always the emotional attachment with the university, no matter where we are. On the question of that, Iltifat Saab asked whether it is bad for Muslim or good for Muslim. Actually, it's bad for everyone. And if you think about it, it was only yesterday they passed the Waqf bill. Had it not been divided, that question was not going to come up. most probably, along with other triple talaq and Babri Masjid and all those things. So that's a bad for Muslim. And it's not my word, probably it has been said many times over. It was not the division of India only, it was the division of Muslims. So if you think of it, it's a division of Muslims, which is bad. It divided the greater India, which India always wanted to be. And it's no good to Pakistan, if you see the way they have managed it. So I don't know who the winner is, probably nobody. And that's why I feel it. Now, one comment my senior colleague Tariq Faruqi, which has made, and Dr. Aziuddin mentioned about it, it was a movement where Aligarh was part of India, and therefore it's the university or the people there, they were caught in that moment also. So it's not the one institution or one individual, rather it's a movement. So that's how I feel it.
All right. Mumtaz Saab, you want to say again? Your hand is raised.
Yes, I want to quickly mention, it is my conviction, strong belief, undivided India would have been an anchor for world stability and peace. The horrors which are going on in Gaza and Middle East, none of it would have happened. You know, the partition did not only hurt Muslims in India or India, it hurt the whole world. It is a disaster of the immeasurable magnitude.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, I think for me, you know, I can only come at these, I'm coming at these questions as a historian from the basis of my research. So it's not really within my purview to try to determine a counterfactual. I can't see what the world would have been like had Pakistan not been created and India been created in 1947. It's just not possible for me. But what I can see, one of the things that I have thought about quite a lot in recent years is the way in which the Muslim League demand was a segregationist demand. It was a demand to keep communities, or to pull communities apart into their own unique worlds. I do a lot of teaching now in my university around anti-racism in the United States, inequality in the United States. The civil rights movement in the United States was an integrationist movement, right? It pushed against segregation as a positive outcome. When I bring those two worlds together, I think about what Muslims were asking for in the late 1940s, and I think about what Black Americans were asking for throughout the 1940s and most visibly in the 1960s. One of the things that becomes clear is that we can't prove a counterfactual, but we can examine other historical moments that may share features. And that has helped me kind of to frame, I don't think any of these outcomes has been perfect. I can't say what a united India would have meant for the worldwide. Muslims are divided the world over in all kinds of ways. This is not the only border that separates some Muslims from other Muslims. So we can look at it as something that's isolated, but I am more inclined to think about how we understand these movements as parts of bigger things that are going on and happening. And one of the things I think it's really important and helpful for me to remember when I speak to students especially is that in 1947, the world didn't look the way it looks now. It wasn't defined by a patchwork of bounded nation states. In 1947, the world was dominated by European empires. People throughout Africa and Asia were trying to break free of imperial systems that did not recognize them as full citizens or agents. And within that framework, Muslim nationalism seems to me one set of possibilities for understanding anti-colonialism and the demand for autonomous citizenship. So I'm not so inclined to, I respect the experiences that people have had, and I think that they are profound. I am deeply troubled and concerned about the threats of the right-wing movements in India that target Muslims. I can't say that they wouldn't have happened without the creation of Pakistan.
Well,
They
yeah,
likely would have.
I understand. Yeah, but just remember that the right wing started, only in 2014, and for 70 years of Congress rule, India remained as a very secular and plural, and is still hoping to do so. It is a democracy, and it will have a change of heart. So Ayaz Ahmed is back again. He is not satisfied with his first question or your response. So Ayaz Ahmed, sir.
No, I'm quite satisfied just to contribute to the discussion um, uh, for going forward in the face of these challenges that we face. Uh, a day before yesterday, there was Professor Suleiman Bashir's retirement speech at Columbia University. In his retirement speech, he said, and I would like to share, he said, the price of being apart is much greater than the price of being together. And he was then emphasizing how bringing people together is much more way of universalizing humanism than thinking ourselves as apart. And in that context, going forward for us in India and the subcontinent, the idea of an imagination of United States of India, involving Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, in some form, not in that rigid, immediately I'm saying in the nationhood form, but say if Ashraf come together on this, coming to terms with democracy and developing an imagination of United States of India within which universal humanism operates, probably that might give us some space for optimism than what we are feeling right now, the pessimism that we feel in India. I have conversation in India, and then people are like so despondent, and they just want to say, don't come here and tell us some views or anything, some escape from India. That's the kind of pessimism that people share. So probably thinking democratic politics on a different register going forward, which is more in terms of bringing together people and probably in some form of confederation, etc., might give us some space for optimism. Those are the thoughts that I wanted to share. And would like to know your views if you have.
Well, thank you. And I know that my friend, Professor Bruce, is about to have to leave, so I just want to thank him one more time for his contributions and his reflections today. His work is wonderful. He's the editor of the Journal of Urdu Studies, so follow Professor Bruce.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Professor Bruce. And I think he just left.
But the thing that I'll say, Ayaz, on your comments is, I think that the goal of our movements should always be agency, should always be autonomous agency. When I listened to the narrators I spoke to in the 1940s, they were working for something. And demands for independence, demands for autonomy, for freedom, always arise in the face of restriction. And whatever path we choose, I'm with you. I think let's work together. Let's appreciate our diversity within whichever society we're living in. I appreciate the value of the diversity of the United States, of Pakistan, of India, of Bangladesh. And I think that the goal of our movements has to be coordinated effort and a goal for creating more space for human freedom. Unfortunately, I think we live in an era where our resistance is required in order to secure those pathways. I didn't anticipate that, but that's where we are.
Let me invite someone who, before Dr. Nazir Saab, there is one Neeraj Kumar Saab. He is from Bihar, and he is I think he's a poet also of Hindi, and he is a very, what we consider in India a word, a good secularist who roams around everywhere and feels comfortable. He wants to express in his own way. And Neelis Saab.
Sir, thank you very much. But at the very outset, I must clarify that I'm not a poet. I cannot do poetry. But
Me neither.
दो बातें कहनी थी.
He recites, sorry.
जी, दो बातें कहनी थी. अलीगढ़, the contribution of AMU students in freedom movement, particularly during electioneering in 1946-1947. तो इसका एक बड़ा मजेदार वाकया डॉक्टर राही मासूम रजा ने अपनी उपन्यास आधा गांव में लिखा है. जब चुनाव का प्रचार बहुत जोरों पर था तो दो तुलबा, जो डॉक्टर साहब का गांव था गाजीपुर में गंगौली, वहां गए मुस्लिम लीग के फेवर में अपनी बात कहने के लिए. तो उन्होंने एक मुसलमान खेतिहर मजदूर को बुलाया और उसको बड़े ही इज्जत के साथ कि भाई जनाब आप इधर आइए. तो ही वॉज वेरी मच ग्लैड कि भाई किसी ने उसको पहली बार इतने रेस्पेक्टफुल मैनर में एड्रेस किया. अभी तक तो लोग गाली या तू तड़ाक से ही उससे बात करते थे. तो उन्होंने उसको समझाया कि भाई देखो पाकिस्तान का बनना बड़ा जरूरी है. तो क्यों, अब पाकिस्तान नहीं बनेगा तो मुसलमानों का भला नहीं होगा, और ये मुसलमान जब यहाँ से चले जाएंगे, तुम सोचो इसलिए बनना चाहिए, जब ये मुसलमान यहाँ से चले जाएंगे तो जो हिंदू हैं वो हमारी मस्जिदों में घोड़े और गाय बांधा करेंगे. ही गॉट कंफ्यूज्ड. उसने कहा कि भाई आप लोग पढ़ने लिखने वाले आदमी हैं, मैं तो पढ़ा लिखा नहीं, लेकिन ये बताइए कि जब सब मुसलमान यहाँ से चले ही जाएंगे तो ये सोचना कि हिंदू उनके मस्जिदों की देखभाल करेंगे, कहाँ तक सही है. वो गाय बांधे या घोड़ा, उससे आपको क्या फर्क पड़ेगा. तो जो तुलबा थे वो बहुत नाराज हो गए, इसको बात समझ में नहीं आती. और वहां से तब उन्होंने कहा कि आप समझ नहीं रहे हैं, पाकिस्तान नहीं बनेगा तो जो आपकी औरतें हैं उनके साथ जिना किया जाएगा. तो बड़ा अचंभे में पड़ा. फिर तो उसके गांव का एक अहीर ग्वाला उधर से जा रहा था, उसको बुलाया. बोला अरे इधर आओ. बोला क्या हुआ. बोला देखो ये लोग अलीगढ़ से आए हैं, पढ़ने लिखने वाले लोग हैं, ये बोलते हैं कि पाकिस्तान नहीं बना तो हमारे मियाँ लोगों को उसमें बड़ा अच्छे से उन लोगों को एड्रेस किया जाता था. मियाँ लोग, गांव में दो फरीक थे, एक मियाँ लोग और एक उनके अहीर थे ज्यादा. बोला ये कहते हैं कि ये मियाँ लोगों की औरतों के साथ जिना किया जाएगा, सो ऐसा हो सकता है क्या. अहीर बड़ा बिगड़ गया. बोला किसकी हिम्मत है कि कौन आंख उठा के देखेगा. उसको माँ बहन की भद्दी भद्दी गालियां दी कि जो ऐसा करने का सोचेगा भी हम लोग उसको जीने नहीं देंगे, मार के फेंक देंगे. तो अलीगढ़ के तुलबा जो थे, देखा उन्होंने कि अब दाल नहीं गलेगी, तो उनको वहां से जाना पड़ा. तो ये तो था उनका पार्टिसिपेशन. और दूसरी बात जो एक साहब ने कही कि पाकिस्तान बनना किसके लिए अच्छा था और किसके लिए बुरा. तो देखिए मेरी समझ से पाकिस्तान का बनना, तकसीम का जो दर्द है वो हर किसी के दिल में रहा, चाहे वो हिंदुस्तान में रहने वाले मुस्लिम हो या हिंदू हो या पाकिस्तान से आए हुए हिंदू हो. जिन लोगों पर भी तकसीम का असर पड़ा है वो सब आज भी उसके दर्द को महसूस कर रहे हैं. हमने कहीं पढ़ा था कि एक खातून थी जिनकी उम्र काफी हो गई, जो सेनाइल हो गई. तो वो अपने जब उनकी ये बात चली कि मरने के बाद इनको दफन कहाँ किया जाएगा, तो दफन करने की बात आई तो बार बार कहें कि नहीं, मेरी जो मैयत है उसको मेरे मायके भेज देना है, मैं वहीं दफन होना चाहती हूँ. तो अब उनके जो बच्चे थे वो बड़े पशुपेश में थे. ये कैसे कहें कि भाई अब आपके मायके में कोई है नहीं, मामा लोग तो घर जमीन बेच के पाकिस्तान जा चुके हैं. बट वो औरत ये बात मानने को तैयार नहीं थी कि उसका गांव जो है अब उसका घर नहीं रहा. तो ये जो दर्द है ये सिर्फ उस औरत के दिल में नहीं था. डॉक्टर महीप सिंह की एक कहानी है, पानी और पुल. एक सिख परिवार पाकिस्तान से भाग के हिंदुस्तान चला आया था. पार्टीशन के बाद वो ननकाना साहिब गए थे. जब वहां से लौट रहे थे तो ट्रेन उसी गांव के स्टेशन पर रुकती है जहां से वो लोग थे। तो वहां के लोग चले आए और खोज रहे थे ट्रेन में कि कोई इस गांव का है कि नहीं। जब उनको ये पता चला कि वो महिला इस गांव की है तो पूरी की पूरी भीड़ वहां आ गई और सब तरह तरह के गिफ्ट्स लेके आए थे और बार बार ये कह रहे थे कि परजाई लौट आ, परजाई लौट आ। वो दे वर सो रिपेंटेंट कि उनकी वजह से उसको जाना पड़ा था। तो जब ट्रेन वहां से खुली तो उस औरत की आंखों से धारा प्रवाह आंसू बह रहे थे और वो कुछ बोल नहीं रही थी। वो सिर्फ झेलम के ऊपर से ट्रेन जा रही है और वो नीचे पानी को देख रही है। तो पानी और पुल का बड़ा अच्छा कॉम्बिनेशन डॉक्टर महीप सिंह ने अपनी कहानी में दिखाया था। मेरा ये कहना है कि ये किसी के लिए अच्छा नहीं था। ये हिंदुस्तान जी सर।
नहीं मतलब आपने अपनी बात कह ली ना, दिल
जी
जी बिल्कुल सही
अभी
है।
मैं एक फैसल जावेद साहब कुछ क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहते हैं।
फैसल जावेद,
मैसेज
oh I didn't see but yeah sure। डॉक्टर नजीर साहब आप अभी जरा वेट कीजिए जी।
जी
नहीं श्योर नजीर साहब।
Yeah, thank you very much. Very fascinating, thought-provoking discussion. I often reflect on the contribution of AMU or the place of AMU in the history of South Asia. To take the discussion one step higher, was Aligarh merely a passive reflector of the convulsive turbulence, especially in the 1940s, or was it an active agent of some of those convulsions? Now, it's very instructive to note that the idea of Pakistan did not originate from AMU, although Liaquat Ali Khan attended AMU. Everyone knows that. It came out of the Punjab, and it's a very complex interplay between the Muslims and the Sikhs and the Hindus. So how would you see it, Professor Abbas? How would historians say 100 years from now, assuming we are still here, view AMU? What original ideas came out of AMU that helped in the formulation of the directions that the history of South Asia took?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that there are a couple things that I would say. One, and I know Professor Metcalf was here earlier. I'm not sure if she's still here, but if she is, I'm relying on some of the arguments that she's made.
She left, yeah.
One of the things that really struck me in sort of researching Aligarh in the 1940s was the idea that the way the students seemed to understand the meaning of Pakistan, and you make an important point about the differences in the outcomes for Muslim majority provinces versus Muslim minority provinces. Of course, many of the students came from minority provinces. So why would they be attracted to an idea that would require them to leave everything that they had known for a set of ideas that may have applied, that looked really different in Punjab? And in trying to sort of sort through that problem, one of the things that I really came to understand was a notion of kind of layered sovereignties. And for this, I think it's really important to remember that we did not, in 1947, live in a world of nation states. We lived in a world of empires. And in a world of empires, there were layered sovereignties throughout South Asia. There were the British, there were, prior to the British, the Mughals. The British had initially been agents empowered by the late Mughal imperial system. There remained within South Asia princely states, many of them led by Muslims or encompassing Muslim majorities. And to believe in Pakistan as an entity in which Muslim solidarity would be realized for many of the Aligarh students, I think, involved engaging more with the notion of a layered sovereignty within a broader South Asia than it did necessarily envisioning an independent nation state that would then place borders around the India that they had known. I mean, this is partly why, for me, it's important to think about the way that Aligarh students moved around North India by train into those villages that were being described earlier in electioneering, because they understood this whole region of North India as being open and interconnected. And they had no expectation that that piece was going to change, only that perhaps within it, there would be different sites where Muslim sovereignty was more or less prominent. So what does Aligarh bring? I think the two sort of these ideas, I think foundationally, the consolidation of a kind of Muslim identity that was starting from the time of Sir Syed, and for whom the universe and for which the university provided foot soldiers. It provided the sort of the personnel for spreading those ideas. And those ideas were, because of the nature of the institution, also implicated within the kinds of politics that others are describing here of Ashraf identity, the dominance of Urdu language. The Bangladeshi narratives talk a lot about the ways that they felt really marginalized within the AMU community as non-native Urdu speakers, or even as Urdu speakers who had learned Urdu in Sylhet. So what does Aligarh give to the world? I think it gives not only these concepts, but also the personnel to spread them around. And that has been incredibly important. And let's not forget the other kinds of ideas that have been fortified in the Aligarh environment, and including the entire school of Marxist Indian history. For whatever one thinks of it, these are ideas that have been cultivated within that space, and alongside all these other notions of Muslim identity and belonging. So,
all right, good. Yeah. Any other question from any person who wants to say something?
Yes, I still have a minor question left.
Ayasa? Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I just wanted to ask a small question. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but ma'am, while conducting the interviews with so many people, did you ever came across a question about the fear of new partition in the people who lived the post-partition experience? Was there some sort of re-traumatization in the people who lived after the partition?
I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean. A repartition?
What I'm trying to say is, was there anything related to fear and traumatization related to the fear of a new partition after the partition of India, British India?
I mean,
so my approach to thinking about partition is actually, and you may have heard this, is to encounter partition not as a noun or an event, but as a verb, partitioning. And I believe firmly that partitioning is the long process that many people here have been describing, which is about the sort of ongoing marginalization of Muslims within India. I think that those politics continue. And so I didn't ever hear anybody express a fear that the country would be again divided, though certainly that's been a concern of the Indian state around linguistic nationalism or regional nationalism and the development of regional identities. I think Muslim nationalism is sort of spectral in the eyes of the state. But no, and I think I also like didn't really respond earlier to someone saying, well, like all the people you interviewed, they were talking about things that happened a really long time ago. certainly the thing that I think is really key to understand about the way oral history works is that the stories about the past are also stories about the present. And so when I was interviewing people in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm also hearing them reflect upon their own experiences and the lives that they're currently living. And those cannot be pulled apart. In that sense, oral history is very different from documentary archival work. Because their presuppositions weigh so heavily on the way that they tell the story. And I talk about in the book, for instance, about the way that affects timeline, thinking about when things happen or don't happen, the meaning of different kinds of events and how they change over time. More than anything, and I've focused more on the stories I heard from Indian narrators today, but more than anything, Indian narrators expressed a lot of apprehension about the possibility that they might be connected to the pre-partition Muslim League politics. They were very nervous about that. They were very cautious about sharing their stories. And because I think that they really felt an existential threat to the community, to the university. Just remembering even the way that the Aligarh magazine that I quoted in 1937 was talking about how Aligarh students had to be very aware of themselves in public. The narrators that I spoke to remained very aware of themselves in public. And I know that within this group, that, that's been communicated as well, which is like anything we say, we have to be careful about its future. I'm only talking about things that happened in the past. But the people who shared their stories with me took a risk.
May I share a little bit about on that? Why I can share more because I am a living what you call example of all the narration of MAO College to Aligarh from 1898. My family belongs from that era, 1898 till today. So I know at each and every generation, stories were transferred in our family, and we know what happened. When you say that people were afraid and scared to mention anything, just reminding you that even in 30s, there were, it's not that all students were in the Muslim League. A lot of them were all on a daily basis were in totally opposite camp and very visible Congress camp or even Marxist camp. Professor Habib didn't just simply emerge in late 40s. They were in very early era. And also, Jamia was not disconnected from Aligarh, even though a very visible, distinct different them, but they were all connected. So I believe that, and all these students, including my family, all Ashrafs, at that time were hardly 4,000 students. They cannot be representing the Muslims of entire India. 4,000 students, all Ashraf. As this Ayasab is saying, had you interviewed people at Allahabad, Lucknow universities, Jamia, and also taken into consideration non-Ashraf and how the errors and the moments and all those things, all those activists were thinking about this movement, you would have come with a very distinctly different imagination of this movement. This particular is a very feudal setup of Aligarh from 20s to rather from Sir Sayyid's time all up to 40s. 95% were all from the feudal class or from the class which wanted to retain their power structure. They were just used to that. But they were not common Muslims. The common Muslims of Bombay, Calcutta, Bihar, in United Provinces, central provinces, all, they were not part of this at all. So, I mean, this survey should include those non-elite, non-feudal, elsewhere, other Muslim students of that era. I'm not talking about later on. Of that era, what they were doing, what they were thinking. Were they participant in Lucknow University or Allahabad University or even Agra University colleges? Who were they? What they were doing? I mean, so the Aligarh movement, the Pakistan movement has seen in Aligarh certain class. What reflection it had in other universities at that time with those Muslim students? What was happening in Delhi College? So these are the questions. I'm not saying that you respond to that, but these are really issues. By the way, in 40 or 30 years back, which I'm talking about, this is 25, so 19 something, around 2000, there was a survey in Aligarh, the same Aligarh, which now has 32 or 35,000 students, about the partition. What do you think that at that time, what Aligarh participated in, or whether you think the partition today, if it happened, do you support it? Almost 98% Muslims. They said no, we don't. I mean, the thing has changed so much because the student body now is not made of elite or feudal. It is all mixed up. The Indian Muslims are very different now. I mean, it's the population that the Aligarh is open now with a very plural Muslim population from all classes, and they don't really believe in that. But at that time, those students believed because 98 or 95% were of the same class. It is possible. Anyway, this is a big discussion. It was a very engaging session, of course, and very interesting. And perhaps a lot of people knew already their families are there, either in Pakistan or in India. They knew what was going on. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think one of the things that I just want to reiterate at the end is, my connections to Aligarh and why I chose Aligarh are also personal.
Yes, of course.
As they are for many. So that's how I come to this work, and I've been so warmly welcomed by the Aligarh community. I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday afternoon.
So there is a big
Eid another session soon.
Yeah, there is a big Eid party by Aligharians here in coming Saturday. If you wish to join from Philadelphia, come here. You will have all the Aligharians.
Thank you so much.
At least
Mubarak.
Yeah, Eid Mubarak. Yeah, thank you very much.
Arey bhai, Radhi bhai, Mubarak to everybody. The party is you said where, in Washington DC? Are you sending a round trip ticket? No, because I would love to be there.
रजाउल्ला साहब,
Chicago and for
आ जाइए, पैसा हम दे देंगे आपको, आ जाइए जहाज पे बैठ के.
And it was wonderful.
Thank you.
You probably know my father was.
You can leave off.
Yeah, my father was in Aligarh in the earlier batches from 1921.
Wow.